Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Hey, welcome to this episode of the Note Closure Show. As always, Scott Carson, excited to be here with you today. Today, we're going to answer the age-old question that I get all the time. It was something that I dealt with, it's hard to believe, over 15 years ago. Notes versus rentals. What's right for me? What's right for you? Now, we get a lot of landlords that come over to the note space because they're tired of dealing with toilets, tents, and trash outs. But both asset classes have their pros and cons depending on which way to go. All right. So we're going to break both of those down for you. And if you're new to notes or thinking about notes, this is something to think about. If you're a landlord, this is something you probably want to listen to. Look, I'm not telling you right or wrong either way. I like notes. I like the passivity of it. And I like the fact of the advantages that I can do this from anywhere in just about any market. But first, before we do a deep dive, let's take a look at what my bot said, my clone said when I asked it that very same question. All right, now what did I ask it? It was a pretty simple question. I'm going to share the screen here. Hey, can you break down the differences between owning notes versus rental properties and the pros versus cons of each, right? Now, this is going to be pretty simple. Great question. Quick, clean breakdown from how I work it, what you own. Rentals, you own the property, you deal with tenants, toilets, and turnovers, or you hire management. That's what it comes down to. Either you're going to deal with it or you're going to pay somebody 10% or more per month to do it. Notes, you own the debt, not the dirt. Okay, you don't own the property. You control the property through the loan and the lien. If they don't pay, you don't stay friendly for long. I like that. As we like to say, you know pay, you know stay. The pros, rentals, you have depreciation that you can write off, appreciation. The loan is paid by the tenants. Simple to understand. You control over renovations and rents, obviously. Notes, you buy at discounts, you set your yield to day one, less competition, no rehab or landlording unless you take the property back, okay? Multiple exits, modify, reinstate, sell, reperforming, deed in lieu, foreclosure, all that stuff can be more scalable and geographically diverse. Definitely, if you're in a harder market. Like I live in Austin, Texas, a very unaffordable market in a lot of cases, so it always made more sense for me to buy outside of Texas or especially outside of Austin. The cons, rentals have active headaches, capex surprises, vacancies, local management risk, that kind of stuff. Notes, you're the bank. If a borrower won't play ball, you may need attorney servicing and possible foreclosure. Timelines vary by state, and judicial states can drag on. Plan 3 to 5K in legal or servicing per non-performer, and expect some deals to zig when you expect them to zag. So true. When it comes to time and control, rentals are more day-to-day but very tangible. Notes, front-loaded paperwork and workout strategy. Then it becomes driven or process-driven with a servicer, right? Where you can kind of automate it and be more passive once they start paying. The returns, rentals, when it comes to returns and rentals, equity plus cash flow, but cash flow can be thin after expenses. And that's one thing I never understood, why most landlords are happy making $200 a month in cash flow. It just doesn't make sense to me with all that work you got to do. Or a capex where now you're making negative cash flow for a period. And just there's some people that don't want cash flow, they're just targeting appreciation. I don't get that. Notes, yield is driven by your discount and Excel. Flexibility helps you pivot to the best outcome deal by deal. Biggest mistakes is thinking one exit fits all. That's so true. I learned to lead with a mod when it makes sense instead of defaulting to foreclosure. Yeah, one of the greatest things biggest mistakes I ever did was trying to foreclose everything to take the property back. If you want passive cash flow without fixing roofs, notes win. If you want physical control and tax benefits, rentals shine. Yep. Want me? And then this is you want me to tailor. Now, one thing is you are going to take some property back being a landlord, right? I mean, not being a landlord, sorry, being a lien lord. There's a difference between being a lien lord and a landlord. Yes, you'll take some property back and can turn them into rentals if you want to. If you don't sell them at the auction, some people don't want to do that because they've I'd rather not have to deal with toilet sins and trash, especially if it's not in my home market. Now, if I wanted to own rentals, I would own stuff in my home state, Texas, or I would own in a state like Florida in the past, where I have the teams to do it. I don't necessarily think you want to be operating rentals all across the country in a multitude of different markets because that gets more expensive with property management and maintenance and repairs and stuff like that. Now, with notes, it works well. And when you look at the numbers don't lie. Buying a note and getting it reperforming is the best bang for the buck for us. Buying a note and then foreclosing and then turning a rental just doesn't make sense. It's always the lowest ROI when you think about time frame especially the state it's in. Texas, it may not vary that much, but when you look at longer foreclosure states, 6 months or longer, having to foreclose, then fix it up, and then rent it, and then hold it for a period of time. The ROI just didn't make sense to me on that. That's me. That's my ideas. Okay. So let's do a little better dive into it, a little bit more detailed dive for you is being a landlord versus being a landlord. Okay. Um, Obviously, rental properties, the option for that is actually buying and then turning it into a rental or even buying a turnkey property that's already got a tenant in it. Obviously, when you're buying notes, you're buying the debt, which is secured by the real estate. All right. You're buying the collateral file, not the actual keys to the castle. All right. Um, like I said, this is to provide a clear comparison to help you decide which path aligns with your goals, risk tolerance, and lifestyle. And that's all dependent on you. And I encourage you, pick up the phone and call me. Talk with scottcarson.com, book a phone call with me. Love to chat about what your goals and what you're wanting to see. If you're already a landlord, does it make sense maybe convert some of those? We'll talk about it a little bit later on. But anyway, let's do a little bit deeper dive. In a rental property, you're buying the property, you're fixing it up, getting it ready, and finding tenants. Then you're managing the property with collecting the rents. Hopefully, you're smart in hiring a property manager or hiring a competent property manager. I know see a lot of investors, and that was a mistake I made early on. I hired a property manager to manage the property, and he was overcharging, and put me in default because he was overcharging. I should have done a better job managing my first couple rentals. Okay. And you're going to generate your income. Like I said, most of the people I know, landlords, are looking for $200 to $300 per month in cash flow. I always think that's too skinny, but that's my personal opinion. And like I said, it's mostly local geographic, usually within an hour or two if they're managing the stuff themselves. Now, I see out-of-state property owners all the time managing, having rentals in different markets. That's fine. Okay. But they're using property managers. They're usually not going to be the one doing it themselves. Now, I've got my next door neighbor here. She's got about 25 rentals here and around Austin, and she doesn't want to be called for anything. She literally tells her tenants, don't call me for anything. Here's your list of vendors to call when you need something. Of course, when it goes vacant, she shows up, but most of the time she does not want to be bothered. If she's making, what'd she say, $250 to $400 per property, okay, she's pulling about somewhere between 6 and 10 grand a month. That's great for her. She likes it. She's got some low interest rate stuff. She hasn't bought anything recently, and that's what we see a lot happening right now as landlords. They're having a hard time buying property with the increased interest rates on mortgages to make it profitable right now. Okay, so that's another thing. Keeping that in mind. Okay. Simple pros here. It says potential for high cash flow and appreciation. You can buy properties that may be set up for Section 8 where the government's paying you. The thing about Section 8 is that the government's usually not going to pay you for 90 days. That first check is going to be 90 days of rents, but it's usually not going to come right off the bat. And also, some Section 8s areas, there's a long waiting list line. Others, there's not a long waiting list line. Of course, with Section 8, you have sometimes more headaches because tenants like to be nitpicky. I've never had a Section 8, but I've had plenty of friends who've had it, and some they like it, some they dislike it. Okay. And then, of course, with rentals, you can also do the short term or the long term. And by short term, I would say 30 days or less, obviously, like Airbnbs, versus, 6 months to 12 months and different stuff like that. And some people like to focus more on rentals on like college towns where they know they're going to have at least up for 9 months out of the year and before people come and go and stuff like that. That's okay, fine. It's a tangible asset. That's the nice thing. And that's what a lot of real estate investors do. They like having something go out and touch and feel, hey, this is mine. You own the property. Unless you're using your self-directed IRA, you don't want to go out and do the work yourself. That's one of the big things. You can't touch it for your self-directed IRA. Always going to be third-party people, okay? And of course, you have more tax benefits when you own the rental property because you can do depreciation, cost segregation to narrow it down. Was it over 27 years? And then many deductions, stuff that you're paying for your rental property, you can deduct, okay? And the cons of rental properties. Obviously, active management, that requires time and effort trying to find somebody who's good. If you've only got one rental property and somebody else has got 10, you're probably going to be the low man in the totem pole when it comes to being active, okay? Tenant issues, vacancies, repairs, difficult tenants. When you have, what's the cost for turnovers? Are you going to have a good tenant? Are you going to have a bad tenant? I can remember dealing with tenants that trashed the property, so I had to put a lot of money to it. When you have an AC break, you got to go fix that yourself. Okay. You usually need significant upfront capital. A lot of times 20% down if you're going like a DSCR loan or another type of mortgage. Yes, you can buy via owner financing. We know a lot of folks like to buy rental properties with owner financing because it's a great way to get in with very minimal down, or sub two investing where you take over the existing mortgage and then you got a low interest rate, low payment, and then putting a renter in it. So there's some creative ways to deal with the rental properties. We've done sub twos in the past, and we actually prefer to wrap them to a owner occupant for the most part, and making a bigger cash flow with less headaches. But whatever your flavor is, whatever your bag is, baby, go right ahead. Okay. The thing that we're seeing right now is market fluctuations a lot here, especially with rental income and property values. With property values declining, new builds getting built up, a lot of people are competing, especially in different areas where there's a lot more multifamily stuff. Free month's rent, there's bonuses, stuff like that. You may not be able to offer that as a landlord. You're keeping new build, new amenities, pool, stuff like that versus a rental property. It all varies. Like, I'll give you an example. Like here in Austin, geographically speaking, a lot of people like renting a house outside of town or 20 minutes from downtown because they're going to get more bang for their buck. It's not going to be nearly as expensive as paying, $3,000 for a, 500 square foot apartment versus a 1,200 square foot house for say $2,000. It all varies a little bit, not being conservative with the numbers. So keep that in mind. All right. And like I said, rent's getting higher for everybody in a lot of cases because taxes are going up and insurance is going up. And so people are always looking to save a little bit by moving out. So that's what you got to keep in mind. If your costs go up, yeah, you're going to increase your rent rate. You're going to pass the expenses down. That's what it is. You're providing a place for somebody to live. Unaffordable housing is always a big thing that we see also in the rental side. Now, let's talk about note investing. How's that's a little bit different for you, okay? All right. You're investing in the actual paper. You are technically not becoming the property owner. You're becoming the bank. All right. Now, the mortgage is secured by the property. The property is the collateral. If they fail to pay, you take the property back. Okay. And usually what you're going to look for, what I always liked about buying notes is that you're buying at a discount off the balance. The balance is usually below the value of the property. So you're picking up a note at a sizable discount off of value. So you're buying it usually at a cheaper price. Okay. If it's occupied, you can often get into these things without having to do a lot of rehab. Maybe you're rehabbing the borrower, okay, working to get them back on track, but you don't necessarily have to rehab the property. All right. And that's why I like to target occupied assets because I become the bank, the borrower is paying me, the bank. I'm not dealing with toilets, sinks, and trash. So I'm also dealing with an owner occupant has more pride of ownership most of the time and some emotional equity to the property. Tenants may not necessarily have that. Okay. Yes, I like receiving monthly payments from the borrower. The borrower is usually paying taxes and insurance as well. They're paying me a monthly payment that I'm going to see a double-digit return and usually more than $200 a month in most cases, depending on how you finance it. And that's the thing about financing notes. You're going to be using cash, your cash or other people's cash. You're not going to be able to get traditional financing or DSCR loan in a lot of cases to buy notes. All right. So you've got to develop those private investor skills. Okay. I really like the fact that it's less hands-on than rentals. So, more passive income. You can do this from all across the country. You're going to handle a servicing company. So like a property manager, or, a landlord's going to hire a property manager. You're going to hire a servicing company who's fielding the phone calls, who's fielding and reaching out to the borrower when they don't pay. Okay. So in some cases, it may take longer to foreclose and then evict versus evict in some cases. But usually most of the time, you're going to evict faster than it takes to foreclose in most states. All right. But then you got to go through the route of doing it. Whereas in owning the notes, yes, it has a little longer times. Maybe that gives the borrower time to get back on track and reinstate the loan in a lot of cases. Well, we try to do. Okay. My favorite thing is no one calls the bank when the toilet overflows. Okay. I'm the lender, not the landlord. So if little Timmy flushes the toilet on Thanksgiving Day or somebody clogs the toilet because Uncle Joey takes too big after eating turkey, they're not calling the bank. Now, they will call the property manager or they will call the property owner. And that's what I always see with my friends who own rentals. They always get the phone calls at the worst possible time. Graduations, vacation, holidays, they're getting a freaking phone call if the AC stops working when it's 105 outside. And that's not a fun thing to do most of the time. Okay. Now, the cons of some notes. I'll actually go back to another thing I put on here. It's less capital intensive than buying property because we're not usually rehabbing the property, buying something that's usually in pretty good shape. Number one rule is never buy a note on something you don't want to end up owning. All right. We just turned down a note deal on a property in Cedar Hill, Texas. The online photos look decent, and then we did a deeper dive, and it's an unfinished property. We don't want to buy unfinished property. Okay. Yes, you're going to spend money on time to foreclose. Every state's a bit different. So if you own properties in different states, you got to understand what's the foreclosure time frame. Texas, it's fast, less than 30 days. Florida could take you a year to foreclose. Okay. You're going to do due diligence on a note, just like you would on a rental property, making sure the value's there, make sure it's so. But with notes, you're going to do the property, the person, and then the collateral file. So it's really the 3 P's: property, property, people, and then the paper. Okay. I kind of call it the note tripod. All right. You take one away and one doesn't make sense that you don't do the deal. And that's just, that takes a little time to understand that you're buying a good note and good cash flow. It's going to work out. It's a little bit different mindset. And that's the one thing, it can be a little bit harder for understanding for new investors, that you're buying the note versus the property. The due diligence is different. And that's one of the big mistakes that we see when we get people that come just from the rental side. They think they're buying the note and they're evaluating like a rental property. No, it's not the case. You don't own the property. Okay. Let's talk about some head-to-head comparisons. So passive versus active. So rentals, more active, even with property management, you've got to be there. Notes, more passive, especially with performing. As you're buying performing paper, it's pretty passive. A monkey could collect on a performing note. If you hire a third-party servicing company, which you should always do, you shouldn't self-service your notes. It can be pretty passive for as little as 15 to 20 bucks, $25 a month per note that you have. Now, non-performing be a little bit more, 90, 95, but you're still not having to go out and knock on the door. Hey, pay me my rent. You don't do that in the note business. Okay. Capital requirements, rentals, you're going to have down payments, closing costs, and renovation expenses. Notes, you can invest smaller amounts, and you can also do partial with notes. So it doesn't have to be a huge amount of capital. It can be a smaller amount of capital. Like, I'll give you a great example. Brian and Lisa, coaching students, they made an offer on a property that's worth 200. They're buying the note at note on the is only like 50. They're made an offer at 35. Okay, Sterling made it offer at 28 on a note that's like 70, if I remember correctly. Keith Holland bought a $95,000 note for 15 on a property worth over 150. Got paid in full because they went to foreclose and the borrower paid him off, so they're losing the property. So he made 6 times his money being a lender. And I honestly think that most investors want to, how should we say, evolve into being landlords and landlords. Once you kind of get that bug of like, I don't have to do this and I'm making more cash flow and I can do this from anywhere, yay. But a lot of people like that sweat equity of going out, fixing up. I own a property, I own a bunch of rentals. I mean, obviously, rentals, there's much more information about being a landlord than saying being a landlord. Okay. All right. Let's talk about some risk factors. Obviously, market risk, tenant risk, property damage. If your borrower moves out, days on market can change. As the market gets more aggressive, you may have to drop your rental price, landlord price. We see that happening in a lot of areas of the country right now where landlords are dropping the rent rates, trying to just get it to cover their underlying nut every month. So they're not making any profit, especially seeing this in a lot in God's waiting room in Florida. But being the note investor, yes, I could buy stuff in Florida at a big discount. I may not see a lot of cash flow, but I'm buying something I can foreclose on and either turn in a rental by undercutting my competition but still making good cash flow because I bought it at a discount. Okay. Let's see here. You also have, with the management side, tenant screenings, you're making sure somebody's credit worthy of getting in there. They don't have an eviction on their aspect of looking at their credit, making sure you're not, what's the word we're saying here? Oh, oh my God, I just went blank. Being against people. Some people are very, what's the word? Oh, I'm not going to rent to you because of your color of your skin or where you're located, that kind of stuff. I'm not saying segregation. Oh my God, I can't even think. Prejudiced. Okay, racist in some cases. Let's just be honest like that. Okay, With notes, I don't care what color your skin is, as long as you can pay and you're paying on a monthly basis, or I'm buying the note existing from a bank. The bank went through all of that risk evaluating, underwriting, and going from there. If you're not paying, that's why I'm buying a bigger discount. I have to try to get you back on track by using the third party services versus trying to rely on property management. Okay. Um, yeah, like I said, collections, you have collections in the side of notes just like you do with rentals, but I think it's a little nice because you're using third party servicers. Okay. Um, and you're buying cheaper. So potential returns, obviously, with rentals, you do get appreciation, rental income minus your expenses. Hopefully, your expenses aren't too much. With your rentals, I think you should be putting 10 to 20% away of your profit just for those capital expenditures that are going to pop up from time to time. And then, you may not get evaluated for a return on T, a return on time, like a return on income. Okay. Notes, you're going to get interest payments. All right. Potential for discounted purchases. Getting people to bring back payments to the table if they're behind by 6 months or so. We always like to, hey, bring a couple months to the table and let's get you back on track. Also, one thing that's a landlord is nice because you maybe have a 12-month lease. You know you're going to get 12 months. With notes, the mortgages are usually 20 to 30 years. Not that you're going to stay in the deal for 20 to 30 years. Usually, if we're buying a note, we're going to be in and out of it in 2 or 3 years by either A, holding it for cash flow or selling it off, or if we have to foreclose, we foreclose. All right. The landlord, you're constantly having like every 12 months, you got to look at getting somebody else in there and what's going on. We can pretty much, logistically speaking, forecast what our cash flow is going to be for the most part on a month-to-month basis. Okay. Um, yeah, like I said, I think notes are going to give you a better long-term financial security. Now, you don't get the appreciation that you do with rentals, but you still get that steady cash flow and or payoff and go from there. So that's something to think about. Okay. Um, if you're looking to build rapid wealth, yeah, you could go out and buy a bunch of rentals and look good on paper. You could both go out and buy a bunch of notes and look even better on paper when you own the paper. Okay. Now, you got to look at your risk tolerance. Okay. If you're buying rentals, you got to be comfortable with hands-on management and market volatility. Sometimes going out and showing the property to get a landlord in if you don't have a property manager. Like I said, I think you got to look at where your predictable and less volatile investment is. If you're in the note space, you're pretty much going to be pretty solid for the most part. Okay. And then that also leads to the time commitment. If you're working full-time, a full-time job, but you may not have the time to handle managing or rehabbing or meeting vendors or contractors at your rental property. Okay. And that's what I like about notes. I live in Austin, Texas. Most of my stuff's outside of Texas. I don't meet vendors there. I mean, I've flown out a few times. We'll get some properties, stuff like that. But it's a lot less time than I would say those that have 20, 30 rentals around here. Okay. The ideal investor profile for let's talk about the ideal investment profile. Okay. Rental is somebody who's hands-on, enjoys property management and or rehab, and they're comfortable with the risk of tenants. All right. Note, it's somebody that's much more prefers passive income, is disciplined, and is good at due diligence because you're going to be evaluating a lot of deals with notes to find the right ones that you want to keep. With rentals, you may be a little bit more limited on what's going on in that market and what you can qualify for with financing in that case. Okay. Either way, if you're good with raising private capital, that comes in handy for both of those. Okay. Let's see what else do I have here. Like I said, this is no one size fits all answer. The best investment depends on your individual circumstances. Do your research, consult with professionals, and carefully consider their options. Talk with landlords in the area. Talk with note investors in your area. Consider both sides of the pie, I guess you could say, both sides of the coin. Note investors can create rentals by foreclosing on the non-performing side. So it's a great way to create it. I would not dive into note investing just to go buy notes in your backyard. That's sometimes difficult unless you're in a state like Florida, Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, where you see a lot of inventory. And I still wouldn't look in your backyard. If you're trying to get to a specific zip code, notes are not for you. If you're not comfortable investing outside of an hour or two where you live, notes are probably not for you. You need to stick to rentals. Okay. But if you're more comfortable being outside and realize that, hey, there's a tool called Google and servicing companies that do this stuff all across the country, you don't have to be the jack of all trades, the master craftsman, the painter, the marketer, the landlord, all that stuff, then notes are probably right for you. Okay. So as always, guys, feel free to book a phone call on my calendar at talkwithscottcarson.com. I'm here to help answer you. If you're looking specific areas, feel free to let me know. I'm glad to direct you out to some good operators and stuff like that too that do turnkeys, or they handle the management side for your rental portfolio. If you're just tired of toilet sinks and trash outs and termites, then come onto the note side and just deal with the 3 Ps: the paper, the people, and the property, without you having to do all the work. All right. Go out, take some action, everybody, and we'll see you at the top. Bye. Hey, real estate investors. So you want to dive into the world of note investing, but don't currently have the funds to sign up for an expensive class or a workshop or one-on-one coaching. Well, then you definitely want to check out the biggest bang for your buck in the note world, and that's our WCN membership. It get you an all-you-can-learn access to our class workshop replays, tapes, weekly coaching calls. For $97 a month, it's the biggest bang of the note industry because you get access weekly with me. You can book one-on-one phone calls with me. As we get different tapes in, we'll share them with our members after our one-on-one coaching students get access to us. We share a variety of tools, like I said, replays to the previous workshop, special discount codes to other events that you can take advantage of to help you get more bang out of your dollar every month. We've been investing in notes for over 20 years, and one of my biggest passions is helping note investors, big and small, get started buying notes. Yes, I got started years ago with no money, no savings, and no list. And I love helping people close on their first deal, get their first private funding partner to help them fund more deals and help them both make above average returns. If you're looking for somebody to help you take your note investing from 0 to 60 and want to get started, my WCN membership is a great place to get started. Like I said, we upload lists to it, video training, coaching calls for $97 a month. What can go wrong? The only thing we ask is you hang around for 6 months, and then if you don't like it, you can cancel. But check it out at noteumbrella.com. That's noteumbrella.com. That's our WCN membership. Get looking at assets today. Start putting your fingers on the trigger to pull the trigger on some note deals here before too long. Yes, anybody can buy notes. I don't care your age, your savings, what race, color, whatever it is. Note investing is all about what action you take, and the first action you should take is signing up for our monthly membership at $97 a month. That's noteumbrella.com. You can also access it by going to weclosenotes.com and checking on the monthly membership. But we are here to help you. Scott Carson, the Note Guy. We look forward to seeing you at the top.